we love you. It is Friday, right? It's Friday. It's Friday, guys. It's time for the live stream. It's time for the Nutmeg Tavern. We are here. We're here early, even. Well, earliest to normal, maybe late is what we're supposed to be here. But we're here nonetheless. Welcome. Come on into the Nutmeg Tavern. We got plenty of room. Fire's lit, and it's nice and warm. I'm joined by the man behind the bar, Ryan.
Hello. It's good to be here today. Thank you for having me.
And he's got funny headphones on and everything. And we have a special edition of... Wait a second. Aaron's back there, too. On the other side of the time vortex.
Hey, everyone.
Aaron.
Aaron's back here helping, too.
On the
Getting
comms.
stuff at the last minute.
Yeah.
A little hectic.
Yeah. We're just getting caught up. It's like I was talking to Ryan about the episode, and I'm like, what time is it? Oh!
And we just both blitzed.
And then I get in here, and it's like, oh, I don't have the equipment I need. And okay, well, we're going to play it by ear.
And everyone in the chat, let me know how everything looks and sounds. I'm not able to monitor our audio today due to the Skype call, so let me know if everything sounds good, looks good. Appreciate it.
So, the special topic today is a book that I received the other day. Rory Groves' book on durable trades. What's the subtitle here? It's family-centered, remember that part, family-centered economies that have stood the test of time. A wonderful book having to do, and it's the connection that we have here with the 18th century is Rory here talks about trades that were both living and an important part of life in the 18th century that still are alive today, or at least in some form. And are those the kinds of trades that people want to get into today? We've got, there's so much of this topic and why it's important to us. So let's go ahead and bring Rory in, and you'll have to excuse my time vortex doodle whapper here. Rory, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. How's it going, John? Thanks for having me today.
It is going well, and it's amazing that I can speak to you through the time difference here.
That is something.
Especially with that doodle whopper. What do you think of John's doodle whopper on his ear, Rory?
It looks like you must be in the 21st century or something. I don't know.
Well, these came from the 21st century.
Oh, okay.
So, Rory, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And so much enjoyed this book. I think the concept is great. It has to do with these and you call them durable trades here. I think to get today we think about the word trades and we kind of narrow it down. I think probably in today's vernacular, just occupations probably.
Correct.
Would you go with that? So durable occupations are another way that we could kind of open that up a little bit. But tell me about your story, why you wrote the book, but specifically where you started from in, how this story all starts. Tell us about you.
Sure.
Go.
Sure. Well, thanks. Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about the connection that this channel has to the 18th century. And I think a lot of that is applicable in this book. I mean, we're taking professions that are right out of the 18th century and finding which one of those are still viable today. The reason why I started down this path, I didn't plan to write a book when I started out. I just was at a point in my career where I was really reassessing things. I'm a computer programmer and have been for 20 plus years. And I was getting very tired of the nature of the industry where everything goes obsolete all the time. That's just part of modern economies and many modern jobs, where you might work on a project and spend years on it, and then you see it go obsolete just in a couple of years. And over time, as a young person, that wasn't too much of an issue for me. I liked change. The rapid pace of things was exciting. But as I began to get older, I began to have a family, began to think of future generations. It became something that just didn't seem as sustainable for me. I wasn't building up an inheritance that I could pass on to my children. I wasn't really putting all my effort and time into something that was durable or lasting. And so that began kind of the search for what else is out there that's not going to become obsolete, with the next invention or recession or supply chain disruption, just what's out there for families who are interested in that kind of a vocation. And then the second half of it is, as I mentioned, after I got married and had children, we have 5 kids now, I really started to think a lot more of my career as an opportunity to work with a family. What could I be doing with my family, not just leaving them and commuting to a city job for 60 hours a week, but is there anything out there for families who want to work together, who want to build something together? And for me, that became a real driving force. And that's why the bent of the book is towards family-centered vocations and family-centered economies.
So you went ahead, and your beginning chapters kind of give the why we are looking at these, and then later on you kind of go through all these different trades or occupations, kind of classes of occupations almost, and you rate them. And you don't just rate them, oh, I think this one's a 10 or whatever, but you have these criteria about whether this one still is standing up the test of time, whether it's good today. Tell me about these criterias that you look at these occupations, and I guess, yeah, let's go with that question.
Sure. So I wanted to find out not only what was durable, but what was the most durable, what was the most family-centered. And I didn't want to look at things in terms of what's the most income that a job can produce. I mean, a lot of times in modern career guidance, you're kind of steered towards what makes the most money, and therefore that must make me happy. But I didn't want to look at income as the sole criteria. So I came up with a list of, it's actually 25 different factors, and I scored every profession according to these factors on things like how did they do during recessions and depressions? How do they rely on a population that's worldwide, or can you subsist on it with just local community as your customers and clients? How much has the profession changed over the course of a few hundred years? Is it relatively the same as it was practiced back then? Those are more durable than professions that are still around, but maybe they don't resemble anything of what the original profession in the 18th century was. And then I looked at things like barriers to entry. How hard is it to get started in that profession? So I can go into details on those, and I'd love to. But after I came up with a score for all of these criteria, then I was able to really rank them from first to last. What are the most durable, the most family-centered, and still be able to provide a living for families who choose to go that direction?
Something that we were talking about just a few minutes ago in our discussions here as we were, working through the book and some of the ideas, and that is that this isn't, even though you're looking at these trades and ones that were around in 1790, right? And the ones that are, and these same ones that are still around today, still viable occupations, that these aren't specifically just rural trades or just city things, but these are over the whole scope of, sort of civilization, I guess, whether or not you're in a high density population situation or not.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, like you alluded to, when I use the term trades, I basically mean a vocation, just a long-standing profession that's been around for a long time. I'm not talking specifically about things like pipe fitting or plumbing or electrician, which would be the manual trades that we think about when you hear the word trades today. I'm using it in the more broad sense. So things like doctors and lawyers and professors and statesmen, these are all in there, and they all score differently against each other in terms of things like income or the amount of education that you might need to enter that profession. So that's kind of the broader approach. But
tell me about this. I mean, you kind of have this hard stop about the beginning. You say you start at sort of pre-1790. This occupation had to be, or vocation had to be established and, consistent before 1790. Tell me about that time period. That's 18th century, the late 18th century.
Yeah, so what was really interesting is the year 1790, of course, or 1789, is when the country was founded. But the other thing that was starting at that date was what became known as the Industrial Revolution. That ran from roughly 1790 to 1840, 1850. And we're still, of course, seeing the effects of the outworking of the Industrial Revolution today. And one of the things, the reason why I chose that date was because before 1790, you could take a trade or a profession, family-centered economy, and you could find a very similar function of that trade going back for thousands of years. It really was a cutoff point. After 1790, when the Industrial Revolution kicked in, we saw one of the most radical changes to human society. I mean, historians call it the watershed event in human history. So it was such a magnificent magnitude of an event. I shouldn't say the word magnificent because I spend a lot of time in the book going into all the ramifications. But in terms of the magnitude, it's hard to comprehend just the degree to which there was upheaval in society that was brought on by the factory methods and the factory production. And so the reason I picked that was basically if a trade was around in 1790 and it's still around today, it means that it has survived the worst that history can throw at it. And that's a huge test.
So does that mean it's still around today as in a trade that people regularly use to support their family?
That's correct. Yep.
I don't think, for instance, I don't think blacksmithing made the book, did it?
Blacksmithing as practiced in 1790 is not an individual trade, but I have it, you could consider it under the trade of metalsmithing, which is in the book, which is alive and well right now. There's still forges, there's still metal shops, machinery shops, and there are people doing very well right now, earning very high bill rates in family-based businesses that are custom machinists.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people commenting trades that were popular in the time period, but what we're talking about are trades that were popular in the time period that are still viable options for raising a family and supporting oneself today.
Yeah, that's correct.
And it's funny how using something like the internet has even caused a resurgence in some of those trades, because now what you couldn't support in your local community, you can support over the entire globe through sales.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look at you're a great case in point here today. I mean, the concept of a YouTube channel that could create this small business where it would employ a bunch of people, and you're bringing really it's information. You're teaching people all kinds of knowledge, and there's a large audience in that worldwide. But it's very interesting in the way that what people are hungry for is that connection to a simpler way of life, a connection to a more stable way of life, and I think that's one of the interesting kind of dichotomies about 21st century technology. People are still looking back to the past for lessons and stability.
Okay, so right now, John, we have about twice the viewers that we did when we introduced Rory.
Okay.
Let's show the cover of that book.
Yes.
Talk about who Rory is, and also, Aaron, if we can get the link for that book in the chat.
Our special guest today is Rory Groves. We've been talking to him. He is the author of Durable Trades. This is new out and an amazing book that has to do with the occupations, the vocations, the trades that are still around, still viable occupations for people, and maybe more viable than you would really consider, but occupations that have been around since 1790 and hundreds of years before that. The interesting thing about them is if they're still around, they're amazingly stable. And if you want to give me that, like 1 minute, Rory, your story again, where you started and how you got here.
Certainly, yeah. So as I'd mentioned before, I'm a computer programmer by profession, and that basically means that everything I do goes obsolete every couple of years. And it also means that I work independently for the most part from my family. I can't bring my sons or my wife really into the business in a meaningful way. And after about working in this kind of direction, after 20 years, I just started to wonder if there was a different way. Was there a way as a father and a husband and a creative person that I could embark in work that wasn't just about making an income, but was actually providing some kind of meaningful fulfillment for my whole family, so every one of us could be involved in it, and to get away from things going obsolete all the time, which is pretty much standard in my industry. Are there vocations that will be around for a while where I could put in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, a whole lifetime, and have a bigger business at the end of that lifetime than when I started? So that's kind of what led to me starting to research and look back to the past, basically, look back into history and say, here's the thing, John, is that this used to be normal. We used to have where families would pass on a trade for generation after generation. I mean, you'd have hundreds or thousands of years of the same business being practiced in the same family. And that all came to an abrupt stop at the Industrial Revolution, right around 1800 through 1840, because you saw people separating from their families to go work into factories. And you saw a lot of people basically forced off the land because they could no longer produce an income on a small amount of land that they used to be able to do because of the devaluation of the products being made in a factory way. It caused the commodity prices to fall so dramatically. So anyway, a lot of people, whether by choice or not by choice, were forced out of these home economies, and they were split up in the process into factories. And what I was curious to find out is are there any of those jobs left that the Industrial Revolution didn't take away from us, that are still durable, that are going to be around for a while, that lend some durability and bring families back together? And that's really kind of the impetus of what started me down this path.
One of the topics you touch on here, especially in the early chapters, is the number of occupations, or the way that people have been specialized throughout time. The fascinating number of the changes that happen, and it's basically the super specialization of the workforce as we go through time. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, okay, this is one of the most interesting facets about the book, and I addressed this right away in the beginning. Is I traced the number of vocations that were around from roughly 1630, so we're right when the very first pilgrims and settlers arrived on the American shores, to today. And what you find is there were around a few dozen professions, maybe as many as 70 professions, distinct professions at the founding of our country. Today, we have over 30,000 distinct professions, and dozens of those being created, dozens of new ones being invented every day, it seems. And the thing about that is that whole process, Joseph Schumpeter calls it creative destruction of industrial capitalism. The majority of those jobs, in fact, the vast majority of those jobs that were created through the Industrial Revolution were obliterated by the Industrial Revolution. They were the very ones that were, if you were in that profession, you would actually end up finding yourself out of a job within 10 or 20 years. But then you have some of these professions that were still around in 1790, and they're the ones that are around today still. So it's very interesting. There's such a high proportion of those professions that are still in existence today.
Yeah, it's one of the parts of the book that, you read it and you're just like, I can't, it's just hard to fathom both how many professions have been created. And then say if you looked at the batch at like 1950, and you said, oh, well, here's the list of professions. How many of them have disappeared in the last 70 years, or pick any date really? And while dozens are created every year, almost as many or more or half that many disappear. So things that were amazingly popular in, say, or I think of it's easier to think of as products that were amazingly popular being made and then they're gone, they're disappear. Nobody makes chemical film anymore. Everybody uses a digital camera. The huge industries that grew up, they were so important and now gone. But yet the things that are happening in this book, hey, they're still around. You're still, So can you think about, as you started the research, trades that caught you by surprise, occupations that are like, yes, this one's still viable. I wouldn't have thought it.
Yeah, certainly. There's a number of them. So in total, there's 61 trades that I cover in the book, and that's trades that existed at 1790 and are still around today. And those are ranked, and as we talked about, they're scored 1 to 61, with number 1 being the most durable, the most family-centered trade, and 61 being the least. But any of the trades that are on this list are extremely durable to have survived to this point in history. Some of the ones, that jumped out at me that I didn't expect, I didn't see coming, were things like midwife. Midwife is one of those jobs which is still not even legal in all 50 states in the U.S. But that's a profession that goes back to Socrates. And of course, it goes back to the ancient Israelites and in Egypt. And that was the standard profession for thousands of years. And it's been banned for a period of time, but still around the rest of the world. It's a very common profession, and it's seeing a huge resurgence right now in America as a lot of women are choosing to have their babies at home or choosing a natural birth, and they want to have a midwife, and they don't want to have it be in a hospital for a number of different reasons. That is a very viable trade that's got a very promising future. I think it's grown something like 300% in the last decade. I'll have to double check the numbers on that. It's a very good paying job, and it can be a very flexible job because you can increase or decrease the clientele depending on your workload. So that's one that I didn't expect, but I found that through the research. Other examples include sawyer. There's a huge burgeoning industry right now of portable lumber mills, people buying these sawmills and taking them to a client site and doing milling wood and sawing wood and lumber up for their clients. There's a number of those businesses that are getting off the ground right now. And that goes all the way back. I chronicle that back into ancient Rome when the first sawmills were created.
Yeah, it's a fascinating list. Did you have one?
There are so many people that are surprised that midwives are not legal in all the states. Yeah. In the comments section, people are talking about things that maybe people that they're related to do that are in trouble right now. Stonemason, butcher, sawyer. A lot of people are talking about trades like that, and I think that people are very surprised to find how modern pipe fitting is. Can you speak to those trades that almost made it, but didn't quite?
Yeah, well, if you take 1790, you got to pull out things like indoor plumbing, which came in around the 1850s or even later, or electricity, right? Electricity was in the early part of the 20th century. So that immediately takes plumbers and electricians out of the equation. Linemen who work on those on the electric lines, they're out of the equation. So in other words, those trades I think are excellent trades, and I think they're very lucrative trades, and we need more people in the trades. But they're not durable enough to make the cut for this book to try to give you. So, give it another 100 years and then they'll be in this book as well.
So some other folks are asking if there are any clothing trades that made the book or were close to making the book, something like tailoring or anything that uses clothing.
Yep, tailor is in the book. Yes. That's that kind of is an encompassing one for anyone that has to do with clothing and tailoring. Weaving, like a weaver, is not in the book. It did not survive the textile mills and Samuel Slater's mechanization of the mills like that.
And how about Cooperage? Did that make the book?
No, in terms of forming barrels and so forth?
Yes.
Yeah. Cooper did not make the list. It is effectively obsolete. Now, one of the things I will say, also Shoemaker did not make the list. Potter did not make the list. There are many of the trades that are practiced as bespoke, they call that, where they're one of a kind, they're artisan type trades. Now, I don't want to rule out that that's a possibility for people to make an income, and there are shoemakers who make bespoke shoes and different kinds of things like that. But I kind of came down on the side of, is it practical for the average family to be able to get involved in this trade, or is it an extremely rare and unique situation?
Yeah, I think that everybody that is in Kentucky or Tennessee looks at Cooperage and they're like, barrels. Yeah, we need barrels for our bourbon, and we grow up with barrels everywhere, but not everybody does. They don't see barrels like you do down in Kentucky.
You know, there's always going to be a niche for certain types of products, especially handmade products where craftsmanship is desired, and that, you know, under the artistry side of things, there's always going to be a niche for someone who has skill in that arena. What we're looking at is there enough clientele to support that on either a local or a regional scale to where lots and lots of families can get involved in that kind of a trade.
Real quick, I want to go through some of the Super Chat stuff, and I'm going to go ahead and just say that I'm going to keep most of these questions and Super Chats today pertaining to the guest and the topic. Go ahead and write stuff if you'd like to, but I'm not going to pick out a whole lot of stuff that isn't pertaining to that, other than these that were fired in earlier. So Bjorn, oh Lord, yes, I actually made it into the time for the live stream. Time for my weekly dose of Ryan's epicness. Oh, and John, too. Mustn't forget that guy. Harshman Hills, first coin for the bartenders. Sound Waves Ghost, just ordered my Needs More Nutmeg mug. It's on the desk now. Josh James sends in a super chat without a donation. Jack Nissen, love the channel. On our recent video, it looked like there's some melted snow dripping. Well, no, there couldn't have been. It couldn't have been. Yeah, we need some roof work. Sue O'Connor, coins for Aaron, our ambassador to the Time Vortex.
Thank you.
If not for his excellency, we would be alone in live time. Man. Wow.
Ouch.
Plus, there'd be no beautiful footage. James Fry, I can work from home, but in my spirit, I cannot. Oh, let me read this. Yeah,
try
I
again,
can work
Ryan.
from home, but in my spare time, I'm a blacksmith apprentice at about 4 days a week, and I love working history. So far, I've made a chef knife. Ryan Mercer said that he is late. Plain Jane going for the barkeep and the Witcher. P.S. I think I'm going to write a poem using the word doodle whopper. You ought to. Somebody with lots of letters and numbers said, did fairies make the list? Farriers, not fairies. Did farriers make the list, Rory?
Fairies did not make the list, but yes, farriers did make the list.
There we go, farriers.
Farrier, I'm trying to find where Farrier is number 32. So they made a strong showing. That would be someone who deals with basically horses and caring for horses and making horseshoes. It's a very viable trade right now.
Very in demand, but I mean, a lot of farriers I've met don't have any of their original teeth and have replacement knees and hips. It is a hard job.
Hey, sometimes the job's worth it. Right? You get some bumps and bruises along the way.
I've been hit by a horse upside the head, and I don't know if it's worth it. I didn't do that.
Somebody was talking about Shipwright. That made the list. I saw that in the book earlier.
Sure.
Yep, Shipwright is in the list. Yep.
And now they're tearing me up about the fairy comment. All right, so there were some occupations in this book that seem like they probably just have not changed a whole lot. Were you interested in that when you came across something like a barber? that it's like, well, it basically that, or a shepherd, that I'm sure that job is very similar to what it was forever ago.
Yeah, it is, and that was actually one of the criteria is historical stability, and that essentially means how much has the trade changed since 1790. And so some professions, like you have a good example of that is shepherd and farmer. So you have, for example, a shepherd who essentially, if they're keeping animals on pasture, I'm not talking about confined animal feeding operations. That's, of course, pretty different. But if you have people who are keeping animals on pasture, that's essentially the same that it's been for thousands of years. There's very little that's changed in that. I mean, there might be a few things here and there, but very similar. You take a profession like farming, that's extremely stable, right, in terms of it has endured and it will continue to endure. In fact, people will continue to need to eat for a long time to come. So that one's going to be around. But the tools of farming have changed so dramatically, and most of that in the last 100 years. So that one didn't rank as high, but it ranked number 2, which is extremely high, but it didn't rank number 1 because of that fact. We have things like mechanization and tractors. We have chemical fertilizers. We have genetic engineering that's changed the way that seeds and food are made. So that's a little bit about how things have changed or not changed, and that's all tracked in the book.
Were you there, Ryan? I just want to mention the book one more time in case you're late to the show, because normally we start at 4, so 5 minutes after. If you came to the normal time, maybe you don't know where we're at, but we're talking about durable trades. We're talking with Rory Groves, and we're talking about those occupations, those vocations that have been around since before the Industrial Revolution, so 1790, still viable, still good occupations for today. In fact, amazingly stable things. So it's a really interesting book that really goes through, and he talks about each one of these and how it connects up, whether it's still a money-making occupation, whether it's something that you can do with your family, whether it's all these different criteria to judge occupations. And then he goes through and say, this is the most durable trade ever. And I think it's so interesting. One of the components with these trades, because they connect with 1790 and before, they're different than a lot of things we do today. Today we're very disconnected to our local community. We do things in the cloud. We telecommute. We order things online. All these trades that were around 1790, those things by their very existence were mostly face-to-face occupations, and they had community to them. Do you want to speak on that, Rory?
Yeah, what we've seen with really a stratification of jobs since the Industrial Revolution, right? It's the standardization of parts and the factory system, and just kind of specialization in the job has reduced what used to be a complex profession down to its individual parts. And then they train workers to work those individual parts. But as that proceeded on over decades and centuries, you saw this continuing distance created between not only people and their customers, which is pretty common today, but also people in the land. And I think that when we used to live very close to the land, it was almost like more of a stable society, because we lived very much close to nature. Forestry, mining, agriculture were the base of our economy. And as we continued to move up and up and up, and now we're very advanced in the knowledge economy and knowledge workers, but you're so disconnected from what's actually going on in the land, in the rhythms of nature, in the seasons, and then you're also disconnected from the local community a lot of times, where you used to have entire villages that they only had themselves to subsist. They depended on each other, and they had incredibly strong relationships and bonds. Actually, one of the interesting things about the Industrial Revolution is that we didn't have policing before about 1830 in this country. So the whole there's so much conversation going around about police departments and policing, and what's really interesting about that is communities did their own policing in this country for a couple hundred years. It wasn't until the urbanization, until everyone was getting brought into factories, and you essentially were living amongst strangers that you didn't know, that crime started to skyrocket, and there was no accountability system. And so the state had to start creating police departments in order to govern the crime in these cities. So that's just one artifact, and there's many others, of course. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with your main point is just that there has been a huge disconnect in the way that we relate to each other and to our customers since before the Industrial Revolution.
And that disconnect reminds me of, I mean, a lot of people talk about it. Maybe we'll see the language in the comments. And I think a lot of us can connect with a sort of a, maybe we're not hitting the nail on the head, but one of the reasons why people like the channel and what we do on the channel is because it reflects a simpler life. And maybe that's not so much what we're thinking about as simple as what we're thinking about as stable, and the life that we live today with the dynamic change that's happening all the time is it creates a lot of anxiety. And what we're looking at in these durable trades are things that are based in community and that have great stability, and therefore there's not that same anxiety that is created. And maybe that's the thing we're grasping at when we're thinking about, we want to live in simpler times. It's like, well, maybe simpler in some ways, but what we're really looking for is this stability, these durable things, right?
Yeah, and I think, you look around, a lot of the ways that people are trying to solve these issues through things like social media and other forms of, they're using almost high technology to try to solve low-tech problems. And really what it comes down to is, I mean, think about how much that can be a distraction or a nuisance when you're just getting inundated with information all the time, and news headlines, and everyone, there's such a competition for your attention. And you just kind of think about, there used to just be people standing face to face sharing information. There used to be a lot more focus on what was good for the local instead of the national. Instead of trying to fix national problems, we're focused on the local problems and keeping our emphasis there. So there's a lot of things that are we're trying to use some interesting tools to fix. And I think that if we really step back and take a look and say, maybe our vocations have something to do with this. Maybe if we would get back and focus in on family-centered economies, resilient communities, really embracing locally grown, locally focused solutions, I think we might start to see a lot more of the benefits and the anxiety decrease from trying to solve all of the problems that are out there that are really beyond our control a lot of the time.
So I've got a really great comment here, and I think it leads into a little bit about Rory, because a lot of people want to know more about Rory, especially what if somebody asked you now, what do you do? What your reply would be. Here's a question. Would homesteading be included? I imagine farming then would be almost what we call homesteading today, particularly before the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, that's a great question. Homesteading as a profession would be probably categorized under farming. The idea of homesteading, what that entails is basically trying to be self-sufficient off the land. And that was the bulk of this country up until the Industrial Revolution. The vast majority of people living, north of 80% of the population were homesteaders. They lived and farmed and raised their families, and they settled their children on the farm, and they retired on the farm, and then they passed it on to their children. And that way of life had gone on for many, many centuries. And one of the differences that the Industrial Revolution kind of caused a split in the farmer, which would have been, Jefferson would have called this the yeoman farmer, just a self-sufficient farmer. So as we started to specialize into, say, monocropping, just growing corn, or just raising cattle, or just raising soybeans, when you started to go that direction in farming, then you no longer were able to subsist off of your own farm's products. You were creating essentially a cash crop and subsisting off of the money that crop produced. That's very different than homesteading, where you're trying to achieve a level of self-sufficiency. But all that to say, there are still many homesteaders that are farming in that capacity now, where they try to produce as much of their needs on the farm and grow as much of their own food. Essentially, that's what we're doing here. Is we moved out to the country about 8 years ago, and we've been trying our hand at homesteading. We've been learning little by little how to grow our own food and raise our own meat and vegetables, and we haven't quite gotten into weaving on the looms yet, but who knows? My wife is making goat milk soap now, so there's that, little by little.
So in the super chat, I've got a few really great things. Emma A says, I'm a teacher, and within the last year, our jobs have taken a complete turn. This book sounds very interesting, and thank you for sharing. Venus says, I'm a city kid, so I can't relate to things like farriers. Are there more city trades or rural trades that survived? What sort of city trades made it?
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of trades that really can only be practiced in cities. One of them that comes to mind is shipwright. You're going to have a hard time, out on Lake Wobegon building a vessel for the United States military. So there are certain professions that do require the city infrastructure. Let's see, what else would be, things like, so treasurer is one of them. Statesman is one of them. These are things that require the infrastructure of government or companies to exist. A courier, so someone who's been involved in delivering mail. Of course, our first postmaster general was Benjamin Franklin. And so there are certainly many trades in here that can be practiced in the city as well as rurally. One of the keys, though, of the research is that, of course, I was after the most durable and the most family-centered. 4 of the top 5 trades are involved in food, fiber, or shelter. So essentially, those trades that are focused on bare necessities, the basic necessities that humans need, those are the ones, unsurprisingly, that will be the most durable over time. And they may go away for a while. I don't want to give the impression that right now we're seeing restaurateurs, they're on the ropes right now. This is a huge issue right now for small businesses all around the country. But the fact is that at some point this will pass. Restaurants will come right back. They are a very resilient trade. I have them under the book as cooks, but anyone who's involved in cooking and that kind of catering and restaurants. So there's many trades that might temporarily go away, but you see them come right back in history as soon as the opportunity allows.
One thing that I was really surprised to see in the book is silversmith. You don't think of that. I don't think of that in the Midwest and Indiana. I don't think of that as a viable option now. So that surprised me a lot. What were some that surprised you when they just scored so high?
Yeah, well, Silversmith certainly is one of them. I interviewed a second-generation goldsmith out in Utah for the book, and there's a huge demand, and there's a lot of people that are interested. We're in an age where people are starting to want something original. Originality is starting to become valued again, and craftsmanship is one of the things that people care about again. For a while there, it was just how cheap can I get something? And that's where the factories were able to provide some answers. But now you see people they want something unique. They want something that was developed by a true craftsman. And you don't get that out of a machine. You don't get that out of a 3D printer. And so people like silversmiths or goldsmiths, people who are jewelers, they have a niche right now that they're able to provide and they're able to fill.
So I'm going to plug your book and your website one more time, and then I'm going to step out of the conversation for a little while and let you and John talk. But thegrovestead.com, is that right, for your website?
That's right, thegrovestead.com.
Yeah, there's a ton of really interesting stuff on there, guys. You should go check that out. You can also look at the book there, but lots of articles. There's a newsletter you can sign up for, so go check out thegrovestead.com. Take it away, John.
One of the things you talk about and what happens with stability, sort of we come in with this, it's been talked about in the last couple of years, the anti-fragile thing, having to do with sort of multiple things going on with your profession, or having multiple professions, and you speak to that. Give me your take on multiple trades.
Okay, yeah. So in the book, after I did all the scoring and I interviewed a lot of people for the book and tried to provide as much information as I could for people who are interested in learning like what a day in the life is like in each trade. After I went through some of that, I noticed that there were certain factors, success factors, let's call them, that really stood out no matter what trade you're practicing. One of those was practice multiple overlapping trades. And what you find over the course of history is, especially in these family-centered economies, you had people that were both shepherds and farmers. Of course, that was pretty typical. But you had people like Benjamin Franklin, who was a statesman. He was an author and a publisher and an inventor and a scientist. And they did a number of different things. George Washington was an orchardist. And so that's not that uncommon to see families embarking on multiple enterprises. And actually, I think that's one of the keys to stability, is to not put all your eggs in one basket. In other words, one real high-paying job, to have multiple streams of income that could be coming through. And and in our case, someone asked earlier, what do I do, or what trades have we chosen? I'm still coming out of the computer software engineering background. And I'm not. I didn't jump, full turkey right into farming, for example, overnight. This is something that's going to take our family a long time to transition into. But that's definitely one of the ways we're doing it. Is we're looking at not just what's the one thing that I should be working in, but what should we as a family be working in, and how can they complement each other in different ways.
Yeah, the idea of multiple trades, or having these 3 or 4 things you do, and of course, in the time period in 1790, especially a homestead person or a yeoman farmer, he would have all these different things to do with the different seasons. It's like, well, I could be a farmer, but I'm not going to be a farmer in the middle of winter. Maybe I'm going to do 1 or 2 little things, but in the winter I can do this. And they would have these different things they would do during the year, or maybe even things that, farming is intensive and then it's not. There's different cycles to that, and I can't reach it. Up there in the bookshelf is the diary of Matthew Patton, and as a perfect example, this is his day book, and it goes through his daily business, and you can see it's like he's a farmer this day, and then the next day he's going out and he's surveying, and then he's setting up so that he can catch fish and basically supply the entire community with a particular kind of foodstuff. And he's got all these different things going on. That is the complete opposite of the idea of, I'm going to specialize, and my trade is going to be this tiny niche of a niche of a niche.
Exactly.
You couldn't get any farther apart than that.
Exactly. And that, it's really in the pursuit of efficiency, which is what the Industrial Revolution was all about, is how efficient can we make everything? And, that in and of itself isn't bad, but when you look at what it does, where it destroys stability, it creates a dependence on an employer, it gets in the way of human relationships. One of the, I could go off on that, but to your point is that the farmer, they had all these different things that they would do over the course of the year. And one small part of what they would do is sell their cash crop and bring in a little bit of money. And to that point, their money was more stable back then, because a lot of times it was either pegged to silver. It was either on the gold standard, so they maybe have gold or silver. But more commonly, they were bartering in commodities. They had corn, and corn was amazingly stable form of currency for hundreds of years. People would use corn to barter for supplies that they needed. So you had a lot of different ways in which people not only had kind of something to fall back on, but they also had their community to fall back on. So it was, if their one family had a failure in their crop, they had a community who they had spent a lifetime building relationships with, or they were part of a church, and that whole church was invested in the survival of that community. And they had a built-in safety net that was just part of life back then.
Yeah, it's really interesting to connect with these things and realize how far our society has changed, and how much the stresses of society have increased because of the particular changes that have happened. And while some of these things are great progress, we can look at them as progress in a certain way. In other ways, all that progress is bought at the cost of stable communities and that were happening in that time period.
Well, somebody in the comment section was just talking about how, every time you make progress in an industry, that changes the economy, right? So it's like bringing something, an animal that's not, in this ecosystem to this ecosystem and seeing how it changes over the course of time. Lots of really great stuff in the comments right now. Somebody asked, when you say family, do you mean like having your kids pull their own weight, so to speak? What do you mean by incorporating your family into this?
Okay, great question. And I mean, I guess the short answer is yes.
Get in there and work.
So I think one of the other artifacts of our modern way of life and our modern thinking is that everything is individual. We think in terms of just what's right for me at this moment in time. We're not thinking in terms of families and communities as much. And this is just part of the breaking down of relationships that we've had. And so when we talk about careers right now, we're almost universally talking about individual careers for individual people. But it wasn't that way for most of human history. Most of human history, a family, in fact, the term oikonomia is where the term family economy comes from. It actually means the coming together of a group of people for the building of an economy, for a family economy. In other words, a business was the purpose of a family. That's why a husband would marry a wife, they would have children, and the whole idea of that family was that they would embrace some kind of vocation together, and within their own little community, that in other words, the community of their family, they would be able to make a living and survive. And then you had other families in the same community doing the same thing, and between them they were able to, survive and thrive over the course of the last 10 centuries. So the idea with like a family-centered economy is, in today's individualistic society, what are the trades and what are the vocations that are available for families who want to pursue something together? Yes, I want to have my kids working with me side by side. I want to have my wife be able to join in with me when I'm working. I want to have elderly adults, that if there's a third generation household, it's another thing that's very common today. That didn't used to be very common, is that you have single generation households. It used to be pretty common to have 3 or even 4 generations living in one household, and they would all be working together on the same family business.
As a quick connection, and we can immediately, kind of grasp this if we think about it for just a second. And very rarely do we think about our names. So many people, their name is Smith, their name is Baker, their name is Carter, and these are trades, these are occupations, and they would not only pass down their name, their last name, but they're passing down that occupation. Somebody has this, and they, we don't think about it. They're just names today, but in that time period, it's like, no, you did that thing, and we, it's just like, we've lost that.
And I would add on to that, if I may, there's a secondary thing that's happening when families are working together and when communities are working together that we've lost today. And I spend some time in the book discussing this, but essentially apprenticing and mentorship is something which is almost totally lost in our current culture. And that was when you would take on an apprentice or you would mentor a young person up into a trade. It wasn't just a job skill that you were teaching them. You were conveying all kinds of other things in the same time. You were teaching them integrity and culture, and how to work with integrity and have values that community valued. There was passing on of the faith to the next generation. All of these things were modeled over the course of working in that profession and mentoring that young person. So when the apprenticeship system went away, which they talk about, it's funny because you read some of these early abstracts in the government documents, they almost talk about it gleefully, about how slow it was for the apprenticeship system, because it just was, you had to teach a young person all the different parts of making a shoe when now we only need to know one part. But when they got rid of that system, they took away the whole transmission of faith and culture and values onto the next generation. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're going through today, a lot of the struggles that we're encountering is the lack of mentorship, passing values and traditions on to the next generation.
I need to interrupt real quick, just because so many people are very excited about the book. Number one, they want to know if they can get it outside of the U.S. Number two,
Yes.
they really want to see it on Audible. Is that something that's happening, or is there an ebook version of this?
There is an ebook version of this. It's not on Audible. I don't know what exactly the publisher needs to see before they move that direction. But maybe if we can move enough copies here on the show today, I'll get a phone call from the publisher and they'll want to do a recording. Yes, it is available. As far as I know, it's in distribution all over the world. So you can Google it. You can come to our website, and we post if there's any discounts available for the book, we put them on our website. But you can get it on all the typical book-selling sites or through your local bookstore. If you want to just go down to your local bookstore and support them, just tell them the name of the book, and they can order it for you.
Okay, Aaron just dropped that link in the chat as well, so you guys can go look at that book. So you can pick up where you left off. I just had to get that out there.
I'm going to take a quick break here, and we're going to talk about Patreon. Every week, I try to read the new Patreon people, and Patreon's a way that folks help support the channel and what we do here, and it's one of those ways that people give just a little bit of money each month, and they get to choose the amount. And the brand new Patreon supporters this week, we have Seth Kennard, and we have Jay. There's Lori Proudman Noble. That's just Nancy, and then there's Troy Dolan, Lori, there's Rebecca, and I think it's Campaign, Brett McCoy, Lawrence Ward, Jay Fine, Jeff Ozzie, and Tim. That's one of the ways people support us. You can also support us on Super Chat or by checking out cool merch on the website, and there's a link down in the description section. Again, it's how we get to do what we do. You guys are what makes it happen. So back to Rory. Did you have a specific...
Yeah, I've got a good launching point, I think, to get back into it.
Go.
So one thing that we haven't really talked about is how your book treats the arts, writers, authors, painters, artists, and musicians. What's going on with that?
He wants to know about musicians mostly.
No, a lot of people are asking about artists. I have a job, so I can't consider myself a musician. Although if I come to your town, please come watch me play. That'd be great.
Yes, there's certainly a number of different art-related professions that are in the book. Author is one of the top 20 trades. The top 20 is what I kind of carve out as the most durable. And so author made that list. Also, we see things like publisher, which is surprising. This publishing industry has been almost completely overturned, but there it is. It still exists, and it's taking on a new form now, which is a lot of more digital communications. And then we also have musicians and artists and athletes are in the book as well. So they don't quite rank as high, and it's a lot harder, particularly for the entertainment-related professions, for them to earn a living for the typical family. But there are many examples to be found of that, and they're still alive and well.
That's for you now, John. You take it.
Yeah, I was still hearkening back to the idea of family and families working at professions together, and you actually see this a lot in the 18th century. And one of the great examples is brick making. So we did the brick episode earlier this year, and that was one of those typical everyone in the family is part of what's going on with brick making. So there are some parts of that trade that were very, very simple manual things. The digging of the clay, the preparing of the clay, the forming of the things, just carrying parts from one into the other. And really, the only way to viably do that is to do it as a family unit. And so it's interesting that there are some of those trades and that have now. Brick making is one of those. It has disappeared. Who's going to hand make bricks today, especially in a sort of a bespoke? And that was, I actually looked up the term. I was thinking about how a lot of the trades have disappeared. These 1790 trades have at least totally changed because the product has been commoditized. It has turned into something that is you only choose one from another because the price that it's available now, typical commodity. And that has driven certain things out of the market or certain occupations because they completely have been factoryized. And brick making is one of those things. There used to be lots and lots of families that made bricks, and now they're all made in a factory and squirted out by a machine.
Right. So masons are still around, of course. I interviewed a mason for the book. But brick making, I watched that whole series of your episode of making those bricks by hand, and you talking about how towns would have basically their own brick making industries. Yeah. That was pretty fascinating to hear how all that went into that. But that's a good example of a trade that's very different than it used to be. It's the masonry trade, but it's still around in some capacity today.
Yeah. So one of the issues that connects back with the community aspect that we miss out today is that of all the things we deal with, whether especially in a household situation, all the things that we say use in a kitchen. Everyone's in you're making food, you have to deal with all these kitchen appliances, you are using all these foodstuffs, and yet in 1790, you knew the people who made almost all those things in your kitchen. You knew who created all those, or where you got all those foodstuffs. And you even talk about in the book, sort of in that industry, sort of stepping into their shoes and making food. Tell me about your experience.
Oh, yeah. Are you referring to the butchering experience?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the course of writing this book, of course, we're living here on our own farm that we've been trying our hand at homesteading for the last 7 or 8 years. And we've gotten animals and chickens and pigs and goats and sheep. And one of the things that was a total black box to me was butchering. Like we take our animals into the local butcher out here on a Wednesday morning and then come back the following Wednesday and pick up. It's all boxed and frozen in individual cuts of meat. And I was, of course, very excited to write that check and to get the result of that. But it was just one of those things that I'm working on this book, and I realized I have no idea what goes on in this trade, what goes on in this building. And so part of the research for the book, I went to work for that butcher part-time for about 3 months, and I learned about the trade of butchering. And we would every Monday we would bring in somewhere between 500 and 1,000 chickens, and we would process those chickens by hand with 5 or 6 other people. And on Wednesdays they'd bring in 4 or 5 beef cattle and a couple of pigs and sheep and goats, and I was right there in there with the crew and skinning and gutting and cleaning and putting them into refrigeration, and it was quite the education. It's not a black box anymore.
Yeah. Today, the vast majority of people that, you go to the store and not only do we not know who made the food, but we don't really understand the process.
Yeah.
So as all these trades were, so many of these trades were community trades, whether they're happening in the city or in a rural situation or let's say small town, whatever, people were able to, the consumer actually went into this place, this occupation. It wasn't a hidden thing. So, you went into the butcher shop and you might see the butchering going on. or you went into the cabinet maker shop, or the furniture maker shop, and he was making a piece of furniture. You saw all these things happening. Not only do you know the person, but you've actually seen the process, at least from afar, or you could see it. I think that's one of the things that, again, we miss out. We open up the box, we order it from someplace, some random, anonymous computer site, internet site, and then it comes and we have no connection with it being made or who made it.
Yeah, right. A drone comes and flies over and drops it on our house, right? That's exactly it. So during this, the supply shortages in our grocery store over the last year, I don't know if anyone else had this experience, but there was a number of times when we would get a product, whether it was a can of beans or a can of fruit, and you'd open it up, and it was different. There was something different inside that can. It was what it was advertised to be. It was beans or whatever, corn. But you could just tell this was a different supplier. It's got the same can, the same label. It's sitting on the same place on the same shelf, and it costs the same. But I don't know who put the beans in that can before I got to my house. And there's so much of that that's obfuscated from us. It's so many layers between us and the person who is actually making the food. And that's one of the reasons why most of the other homesteaders that we know are doing it at all, is because they just want to know what they're putting in their food and what they're putting in their bodies. They're doing it just to be healthy and to enjoy, being part of the process. But there's so many unknowns right now. You don't really know who's been part of that process of making your food or making your furniture, or what their quality of life was when they were doing all of those things. That wasn't quite the case during, before the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. Did you have something?
I had another question.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
Go
Well, somebody just said, my husband and I teach the trades that we know on an apprenticeship level. And I know that you hold workshops on your property. That's something that you feel like is, I don't know, is that something that you feel like is part of your responsibility to your community?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we feel called to this. Ever since we moved out here, we've invited people to come out and to learn right alongside us. We don't really feel like we're experts in anything other than we have a huge passion for learning how to homestead, learning how to care for the land and for the animals, and build relationships with the community. So we've done things like having summer day camps for kids, and we've had beekeeping workshops and maple syrup tapping workshops, and we had someone that came out and showed how to spin wool. Using a spinning wheel from the local community, different things like that. And yeah, that is part of not just what we enjoy doing, but we see that as a potential trade for us, which would fall under the umbrella of tutor or informal education.
One of the things that it reminds me, not trades that actually the indurable trades or the indurable parts of the trades, I think are the things that sometimes I focus on. There's this there was a great number of trades, especially happening in the that were continued all the way into the 20th century, and some of them eked out a life into, say, the 1950s and 60s, and then finally they just collapsed from the amount of pressure they had from industrialized goods. But all these people, especially living through the early 20th century, they were still doing some of these hundreds-year-old trades, like creating wooden fences by hand, and hand tools by hand, that just that there was still demand for in the middle 20th century, and then finally they just sort of up and disappeared. And you could almost feel there was a reaction and a fear in the 60s and 70s, and maybe even in the 80s, when people finally said, "Now wait a minute, some of these things have disappeared. We've lost them." Those old men finally gave up, and they never bothered to train any apprentices. Nobody wanted to take on that profession anymore. There's still books around that talk about that. So many very very interesting things that communities were able to support up until that point, and then they just disappeared.
And that's a good point, because there's a number of factors to what technology does, and one of the things is it does present opportunities. There's efficiency gains, there's convenience gains, and the reality is that most people, they want those benefits, but the problem was, and this happened, of course, en masse during the early 19th century, was that many people didn't want that. They wanted to stay on the farm and continue to raise their family. They wanted to continue a way of life that had been handed down to them for many, many generations. And they were forced off of the farm simply because they could no longer afford it. It was not an option for them anymore. And so there's kind of this two-handed approach. You have to weigh things when you adopt technology. That's what we look at. It's not that the earlier, prior to the Industrial Revolution, that people just rejected all technology. There were many farm implements, and you've cataloged a lot of these on your show. Many very creative, ingenious tools that people came up with and used over the course of their lives. But there was always a kind of a weighing or a considering of how this technology would impact the community. And that stopped happening when people moved into cities by the millions, and they really didn't have regard for who their neighbors were anymore because they simply didn't know them. So that's one of the things that spawned this kind of, what would you just say, like amoral use of technology without consideration.
Yeah, even in the time period, and especially what's happening in 1790 and pushing forward, as they went to more and more mechanization, there is reaction going on in that time period. There are people that are breaking up machines. They're angry at factories because of what it's doing to society. So it's interesting to it doesn't happen. People did not walk into that without thinking about it. Now, the people that were against that progress did not succeed in stopping that progress. And I mean, I don't know how to, I can't look on those things and necessarily say it was wrong or right. But we can definitely look at those things and say, yes, people were looking at those changes and saying, these bad things are happening along with the good things.
Okay, we're running short on time.
Yes, we are.
Somebody in the super chat asks what a good resource for learning about homesteading is. They mean a book. Do you have any modern recommendations on homesteading books, Rory?
Absolutely. Actually, in the back, in the appendix of this book, but I'll look it up while we're talking, there's a huge catalog of additional resources in a number of different ways. Let me see if we got. So a couple of my favorites is there's a book called The Self-Sufficient Life by John Seymour. There's The Backyard Homestead by Carleen Madigan. One of my favorites is Back to Basics. That's fascinating.
That's the one I was trying to think of.
Yeah. I have that cataloged, I think, inside the book somewhere. Also, if you come to our website, we have a free newsletter that we publish, and that's one of the things that we cover is homesteading topics. And so, we'd be happy to refer you to that. That'd be one way to keep in touch with us, and we'll send out about 4 times a year. We send out a newsletter with different homesteading topics in it. But definitely those are a couple of good ones.
Right, and there's a fascinating YouTube channel that you've got listed here too.
I do. You'll find a YouTube channel with 18th century cooking.
It's
in
crazy.
The book too.
Right. That sounds wild. John, it's time to wrap it up. I want to get to some super chats after we say farewell to the guests.
Again, the book, Rory Groves' Durable Trades, Family-Centered Economies That Have Stood the Test of Time. Rory, thank you for joining us on this and talking about the topic. Amazing book, and I especially, we didn't talk about that idea of who's the. Give me 1 minute of who you wrote this book for.
Yeah, well, it's essentially for anyone who is not finding the fulfillment in the highly specialized modern economy, and they're looking for something that's more durable, more stable, more long-lasting, and they want to do something together with their families. They don't want to be split apart into separate jobs all the time, but they really want to build something together. So that's who it's for.
Great. Thank you for joining us, Rory. Again, make sure to check out the link in the description. He'll probably put one in the chat for you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rory.
Thank
It was
you
wonderful
so much.
talking with you.
You too. Thank you very much.
Okay, so getting into some super chat that I couldn't. Speaking of style, Tony says, thanks for the show. What a wonderful guest. Pamela Rooney, gives a thumbs up with a donation. James L. Townsend is a new member.
Is he?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Look at that.
Good job.
Okay, so somebody was talking about, did a florist make the list? I don't think florist. I don't remember seeing florist in there, but great topic and guest. You keep consistently delivering some of the best content out there. Cheers, Jacob Barcinas. Thanks for the great content that you guys keep producing. Cheers for the upcoming year. Jay Karen sends in a super chat without a note. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to think of what I wanted to say there. The Trauma Factor. Hello from the Wayside Inn in Sudbury, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Sparky says advances in logistics now make piecework cottage industries, which may not have been profitable 20 years ago, a viable thing.
True.
Max, you're cool. Much love to the Townsends gang. I'm sorting through the ones that I've already read. Okay, Timothy is asked if the book is more statistical or does it also contain any practical information. I'd say it's both. It hits both.
Yes.
So there are a lot of statistics in there, but it's very practical. Great topic. As a computer programmer myself, I can identify with Rory's points of view, and it has been a topic of interest. I will be buying this book. Another person wanting the book on Audible. Keltwood 5 just got here. Great subject. Sparky, I grew up working in Dad's store and Grandma's farm. Sparky again.
Yes.
Typical cash crop farmer 200 years ago has a better feel for economics than the typical economist with fancy book learning.
Quite true.
And John Ragstad. Oh, we already talked about that one. So that finishes up Super Chat. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah. Amazing, wonderful topic. Great connection to what we talk about here on the channel, and does it affect our normal lives? Our modern lives today? Can it connect it? Does it? Do we understand what we have given up in our modern society for the great advances that we have? Yeah, we've given up things while we've gained great things. Some things have gone away, and it's always good to sort of reconnect and understand how our lives are different. So, wow. Excellent. Thank you so much for coming along today and the amazing support that we get on the channel. You guys make it happen. With the comments, sharing our videos, that's how people find us. It's great to hear the different stories. Of course, sometimes it's the story like, oh, I wanted to tell my friend about your channel, but they already knew about it. But you guys sharing the channel, that's how people find out what we do. So thank you for that. Your amazing comments, your support, whether it's watching videos or supporting us with Super Chat or Patreon or merch. You guys make it happen. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Aaron. And thanks for watching today. Have a great weekend.